So my name's Anna. I'm the director of Flight Free UK. We're a charity that encourages people to travel without flying. And we do that through giving information about the climate impact of flights and giving inspiration for traveling without flying. So we look at what the barriers are that people have to choosing flight-free travel. And one of them is that they're not aware of the climate impact. So part of our role is public education of that. And another thing is they might not be aware of the alternatives. So again, that's part of our work. But a lot of the time it's about the social norms that surround us when it comes to choosing how we travel. So we run something called the Flight Free Challenge, which asks people to take 1 year off flying, which is a massive challenge for some people. It's difficult, but it is achievable. And through that, we hope to introduce people to different ways of traveling and break a habit, perhaps, so inspire longer-term behavior change with that shorter-term challenge. We run several events throughout the year, and we try to run in-person events because it's so good to get together in a room and meet other people who are interested or curious about this topic. But we also run online events, so it's possible for people to join from all over the UK and even further afield. So yeah, it's really good to be here in Glasgow and sharing our event with you. All of our events kind of cover the topics that I've just outlined. So you'll hear tonight some information about climate, some information about community organizing and changing the social norms, and some inspirational stories about flight-free travel and how you can do that.
Good evening, everyone. So thank you very much, Anna, for the invitation to be here. As Anna mentioned, I'm Todd Ehlers, and I'm from actually, maybe I just go to the next, there we go. Says a little bit more about me. I'm from the School of Geographical and Earth Sciences at the University of Glasgow here, and I work on a variety of different things, but one of them is climate change and how it changes through time. And what I want to do this evening is just provide you with a little bit of context about carbon dioxide emissions and how they've changed over the last couple hundred years, with some hints of how they change over much longer time periods as well. But the main thing I've been wanting to, or the main reason I put this talk together, and I've given this before, is that a surprising number of people actually don't understand yet that humans are responsible for increased carbon dioxide emissions. It's not that they deny it, it's just that they don't know for sure. They think it might be natural climate variability. And so I put this together to kind of summarize literature on this so that people understand that it is really a reality. So I want to start with having you think about a simple question. You know, we all make bad decisions, or we all have bad ideas. But what do you think humanity's worst idea was ever? Whew, that's a tough one. Okay, well, you could say it was the invention of gunpowder, or supersize it a little bit. Maybe it was the invention of nuclear weapons, or maybe some people would say it was the invention of capitalism. What I want to get across today is that I think actually humanity's worst idea was its decision to start doing the mass burning of fossil fuels around the year 1850. And this would be things like oil, gas, coal. And we did this to fuel the Industrial Revolution. So it all started here. This is a photograph of from 1860 of an oil field in Pennsylvania in the US. And this is basically where we started our experiment on nature here. So you could argue, though, that a lot of good things have come from burning fossil fuels, and they definitely have. I mean, we've lifted billions of people out of poverty. We've been able to cure diseases. We have, our lives are surrounded with amazing things like iPhones that record you simply because of this industrial revolution and the use of fossil fuels. The point I want to get across is that today we're getting to the point where all the benefits we've had from the burning of fossil fuels are now starting to be undone. And soon, and even now, it's costing us a lot. And I want to illustrate what those costs are in a diversity of different ways. So it all starts with this image here. What this shows you is time on the horizontal axis here. starting with the Industrial Revolution at 1850. And what's shown on the vertical axis then is the amount of carbon dioxide emissions per year that are just from humans. Now, there are natural sources also. And the numbers there are in gigatons. So a gigaton is the equivalent of 1 billion tons. So, okay. So what we see on the left-hand side is that for the first 100 years or so, it was relatively low, our emissions that we were doing. And then around the year 1950, we have what we call the Great Acceleration, where it just starts to increase more rapidly. And today even, despite many of our efforts, it's still increasing. It's just year after year after year, we're continually putting more in. So today we're at around 38 billion gigatons per year. Now, a gigaton or even a ton of carbon dioxide is a really hard number to imagine, right? Like, what is that? So to put it in perspective, let's think about a small compact car, like a Fiat 500. So a Fiat 500 has a mass of about 1 ton. So what we're doing per year is putting the equivalent mass of 38 billion Fiat 500s into the atmosphere in carbon dioxide. That's a lot. And with the number of people we have on the planet, this would be on average about 5 cars per person equivalent going now into the atmosphere. Now, it's not really on average. I mean, some countries like the UK and others do far more than that and others much less, but it's a lot, okay? So why was this the worst idea? Well, as many of you have heard and are probably aware of, that carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. And what it essentially does is it traps the sun's solar radiation, the energy, in our atmosphere and progressively warms things a little bit. So the more carbon dioxide you have, the more warming you'll get. And what scientists have done over the same time period that you see here, these are actual measurements that people have made of the atmospheric or near surface warming. Now, the numbers on the left-hand side, it's in Celsius, but it's showing you relative to the pre-industrial revolution how much things have changed. So what you see for the first 50 or so years, we see lots of wiggles. In fact, we see this all the way across this plot here. That's nature just kind of doing its normal thing. There's lots of reasons why we have those wiggles, and we understand most of them. But again, around the year 1950, you see a rapid increase in temperatures that starts occurring there. Okay, so a very fair question is, couldn't nature just do that on its own anyway? I mean, could be. And if it could do that on its own, then we should still be concerned, but we would be less concerned about humans being the cause there. The short answer to that question is no. Nature can't really do this on its own. So the warming that we have today, the magnitude of warming of about 1.5 degrees here, is the highest temperatures we've seen on Earth in the last 2,000 years. And if you look at how much the temperature has changed over this roughly 200-year time period here, the Earth has not experienced that rate of warming in over 100,000 years. And we know this from different geologic records we look at. So this is truly exceptional, okay, geologically. So in other words, we're doing an experiment on nature that hasn't been done before. And honestly, we don't know when you warm things or warm the planet this fast, what's actually going to happen. A second reason why we know, so to say, that this is not nature doing its own thing, is that scientists from around the world have independently tried to look at what would the warming be without the human emissions, okay? And what you get from that is the blue line, okay? So again, lots of wiggles from natural variability, but you notice that over the since 1850, you'd have essentially no change in temperatures. So if we put these things together, we have very high confidence now that actually the difference between the yellow and the blue lines here is entirely driven by human emissions of carbon dioxide. And if you're still not convinced, we can overlay on top of that the emissions that I showed you through time, and the shocking resemblance between the slope of our emissions through time and the warming that's occurred is, I think, pretty convincing that we know why this is happening here. Okay, so there are many impacts to this, and you've in the news pretty much every week you read of something related to global warming where it says scientists say or studies find. The types of predictions and things you're seeing in the media, scientists have actually been predicting would happen over the last 30 years or so. So examples of this are that with global warming you get increased heat waves. For example, what we saw in Europe earlier this year. And in fact, over the last 20 years, the increase in heat waves around the world has resulted in an additional 61,000 deaths. In Europe alone, with the first heat wave, there were 2 that occurred. That killed 1,500 people alone. Okay. Increased heat waves also changes in precipitation lead to increased wildfires, which has been predicted, and we're observing more of them. Again, we saw these across Europe earlier this year. Increased global warming does a huge change in how you distribute precipitation in the year and also globally. And so we have increase in droughts that are occurring, such as we have currently in Northern Africa, and actually on just about every single continent, we're seeing an increase now in the occurrence of droughts. Increased global warming also increases the number of floods that you get. And the reason for this is that with a warmer atmosphere, you end up having more intense rainfall events and then longer dry periods in between. So you may not change the total amount of rainfall a place gets, but you change a lot how it's distributed, and that results in the flooding that we hear about every year. Increased global warming puts more energy into the atmosphere and into the oceans, and this results in higher intensity hurricanes and typhoons, and potentially also results in an increased frequency of them. And we're observing this actually just now in the Western Atlantic hurricane. And lastly, increased global warming. You increase, it essentially operates to increase the acidity of the oceans. And this is an example of bleached corals. And we've now reached what we think is a tipping point in this, where we've started to destroy entire ecosystems of corals simply due to the increased acidity in the oceans resulting from global warming. Now, when you think about all these things I've just shown you, and I think you've probably seen many of these already in the news, I mean, that in itself and the social impacts that accompany each one of these events should be enough for you to care and want to do something about it. But what I want to highlight is something else that's recently getting a lot of attention, and there's a lot of study going into this, and that is that global warming is really, really expensive, okay? And the bad part about this is that we're all paying for it, we just don't know it. So here's some example. Over the last 20 years, the current estimates are that the global economy would be 28 trillion US dollars richer were it not for the emissions of 111 major oil companies. And this estimate and these numbers basically come from the impacts of extreme events such as heat waves and flooding. And scientists are now trying to link these individual events to how much of that is accountable to the emissions from oil companies. So this is going to be really interesting in the future because it sets the stage for climate liability, and that governments could start suing energy companies for damages. So we'll see if that happens. Okay, that's the last 20 years. So let's think now, let's think forward in the future. What will the impacts be for our children or our grandchildren? Well, people have started to look at this also, and I'll keep the story short, but basically when we have 3 degrees of warming, which is what we're actually expecting to see now by the year 2100, the impact of extreme events and looking at just heat waves and just flooding type events will be that the global gross domestic product is 10% less, and poorer countries will be disproportionately hit by this and have a 17% decrease in global gross domestic product. Now, even 1% of global gross domestic product is, again, one of these numbers that's hard to comprehend. So to put it in perspective, a 10% decrease in global gross domestic product is 5 times the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in the year 2022 alone. That's a big number. And furthermore, this is about, it's 2 times the COVID-19 impact. It's 5 times the impact of the 2009 financial crisis. So that's a big number, and this again is just looking at extreme events. It's not accounting for things like sea level rise and the impacts of that, or prolonged effects such as drought and the impact on agriculture and stuff like that. Okay, so what I hope I've shown you is that, you know, the benefits that we've received from the Industrial Revolution and burning all these fossil fuels, this is now being undone. We're paying for this, and the problem is, these types of numbers I just showed you, this isn't a bill sent in the mail, it's distributed across the world. So you are paying through it, through your taxes eventually, but it's not something people directly see the damages for, which I think is part of the reason why we don't have as much action against it as we probably should. Natural question is, though, you know, is there hope for this? And are there solutions? You know, can we be at least a little bit optimistic about the future? And I think we can. And the reason for that is that if we go back to 2013, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change estimated that by the year 2100, we would be living in a world that's 4 degrees Celsius warmer. This would be a catastrophe. The biosphere would collapse in many, many ways. You'd potentially have the collapse of civilizations with this. Just think about what you're seeing now and amplify it by a lot. Okay, but since this time, since 2013, we've had the Paris Agreement, not entirely successful, but it has got governments thinking about carbon dioxide emissions, trying to set targets for this. We've also had a green transition where we're now having cheaper and more affordable energy alternatives that can help get us off the fossil fuels here. So as of today, actually, the estimate for the year 2100 is now 2.7 degrees Celsius warmer. So the measures that we have been doing have been making a difference. That's a whole lot better amount of warming than 4 degrees. That still scares the hell out of me, and there's going to be a lot of impacts from this, but it's better. And the actions that we're taking and initiatives such as this one are the kinds of things we need. And if we keep doing this, I think we can have hope for the future. So that's all I wanted to say. If you want to share the content of this talk, it looks like there might be a video available somewhere, but I also recently gave a slightly longer version of this as a TEDx talk, and it's on YouTube, and you can look it up and share with friends. So thanks.
What I want to do now is to illustrate how that relates to flying specifically, but also hopefully the information that you've seen already galvanizes us even more to want to do something, because it's really important that we do. And there are lots of things we can do, and that's why Flight Free UK exists, to inspire that change. So I'll take you through that now. So very specifically, how does flying relate to the climate information we've just been given? And I suppose more broadly, why do we even focus on aviation emissions, and why did Flight Free UK start in the first place? Partly because when it comes to the measures that we can take to reduce emissions, we're quite aware of a lot of those measures, and we're aware, so this chart kind of illustrates or outlines some of the things that we can do to reduce emissions. So if you look at the eating meat and the driving your car bars, those are things that we've been talking about for a long time now. So we are generally aware of that having meat in our diet is a high climate impact. We're generally aware that driving is a high climate impact. So those are things that we are aware that we need to reduce, or we're encouraged to reduce. And we have been for a long time now. We have been talking about changing our light bulbs for a very long time, but it's very insignificant compared to other things. But somehow the conversation is stuck on those small things. We're not yet talking about flights. We're not talking about the big stuff, but you can see from the chart that flights are the big one. That's where the big savings is going to be made. Because just to clarify this and to explain it, the top bar of this bar chart shows the emissions for a return flight to Bali, a long way away, it's a long haul flight, per passenger. So that's not for the plane, that's per passenger. And compared to the things that we are already quite aware that we need to reduce on, like eating meat, like driving, it completely overshadows the emissions of those other things over the course of a year. So a year's worth of eating meat is not as carbon heavy as just taking a single flight, if it's a long haul one, of course. Bali is a long way away. And to bring that even more into context, the vertical line here is what has been recommended as the annual sustainable carbon footprint. And I use the word sustainable quite loosely there because it's a very difficult word to use, but analyses have been done specifically by the IPCC, so the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change that Todd mentioned. And the suggestion is that globally we need to be looking at emitting no more than 2.3 tonnes per person. Again, as Todd hinted, lots of people are most of the global population is currently below that. Here in the West, we're very much above that. But if that's what we're aiming for, you can see very clearly that there's no room for flights if we are to carry on doing the things that we need to do to be alive, such as eating, such as heating our homes or having shelter, such as clothing ourselves. Those are the things that we need to prioritize our carbon budgets for. So that's why we talk about flying. And something that's also really useful to know is how flying compares to other forms of transport. So this shows that, this kind of illustrates that other alternatives are much lower in carbon, which means that that can facilitate our travels. If we choose not to fly, we can have a huge impact. And this, I've only got one left actually of the postcards on the table, but maybe you can take a photo of one later, and you can always order some from us at Flight Free UK. But just to quickly explain all of these, the chart. So the lowest carbon form of transport is international rail. So this covers generally high-speed trains on the continent, including the Eurostar. And the reason why the emissions of those specifically are so low is because on the continent, a large proportion of the electricity is renewable, and whisper it, nuclear. But that does mean it's very low carbon. Then we're looking at ferry foot passenger as the next one up, which might surprise you because ferries are quite polluting. But as a foot passenger, you're really just taking a small share of those overall emissions. So that's a great option to keep your personal share of those emissions down. Coach is also a really good one, so carbon efficient and nice and cheap as well, so that's a good budget option. Electric car is good. Now, the electric car emissions, it really does depend where the batteries are made, where the electricity is made, and that's kind of an average, so some of them will be a lot lower than that, some a bit higher. This depends on 2 people being in the car, which is average occupancy for a car. All of these rely on average occupancy, by the way. Then rail, so local trains. So we're looking at maybe the trains here in the UK. Some of the trains still use diesel, so it's an average of those. And our electricity here in the UK is not quite as low carbon as the stuff over on the continent, so that's why that's a little bit higher. As a car passenger on a ferry, again, this is 2 people, based on 2 people sharing, so if it's a family of 4, you can halve that. But yeah, as a car passenger, you take up a bit more space on the ferry, so your share of the emissions is a bit higher. A good old-fashioned petrol car, again, 2 people sharing. And then, of course, the flight is the highest of all of them, quite significantly. And flight emissions are also complicated in terms of how long you're going. If it's a domestic flight, if it's a short-haul flight or a long-haul flight, often on a long-haul flight, you're carrying extra fuel you're burning extra fuel just to carry the rest of the fuel. So there are there's huge variety as well, even within the flight. Domestic flights, because most of the fuel burn is at landing and takeoff, the fuel burn for the distance is very high, but overall it's a bit lower because the distance is shorter overall. So there are so many different factors to take into account, but this is an average based on what DEFRA says, so Department for Energy and Farming Rural Affairs. That's who's come up with these figures. I think that's right. Yeah, okay. But so if you're looking on a kind of journey basis, a specific journey, comparing flying to taking the train, you're looking at huge savings. So if you're taking the train to Barcelona, for example, you can save 91% on your emissions. If you're starting here in Glasgow, it's a little bit less of a reduction because the UK leg is a little bit higher in carbon, but you're still looking at like 80 to 90% saving on your emissions. So it's still super significant, especially when you consider that London to Barcelona is Europe's 6th busiest air route. It's such a common route and it's so easy to do by train. And I did it by train just last week. I did it from London because that's where I live, but I know a couple of people in this room have done that journey by train from Glasgow, and it's a wonderful journey and it's easy. 3 trains will take you from here all the way to Barcelona. You're changing in London, you're changing in Paris, and traveling through France traveling through the whole of the UK and through France is an experience that really helps us to understand why we travel. So from the very chilly and right now rainy Scotland, all the way down to London, where you would very easily make a change from London Euston to London St Pancras, down across into northern France. So Paris is not much different in terms of climate, culture, and everything else. You're crossing Paris, and then you're on the high-speed TGV, and if you can get a seat on the upper deck, then you've got views for miles, and the plains of northern France start to give way to the more mountainous river valley of the Rhone as you go through, and you start to see mountains on the horizon and vineyards everywhere, and you even see flamingos when you get to this point here. You're going along the Mediterranean Sea, and there's the Med, and there's a lake with flamingos in it, and you've got the Pyrenees on in the background. And then you tunnel through the Pyrenees, so you don't go over the top, sadly. But then you're in Barcelona and out into the lovely warm evening, and it's just taken, that would take 2 days to get to Barcelona. So your holiday begins the minute you step on the train and continues as you step off of the train in Barcelona. Huge emission saving as well. So one of the things that we try and communicate to people is that, yes, your choice makes a difference, because this might surprise you. We often think, oh, it's the business people on planes all the time. Oh, it's others who need to change their habits. That's what's going to make the biggest impact. But actually, business trips make up a tiny proportion of overall flights. This is since COVID, so this this travel data comes from 2023, where business trips make up 7% of all trips. Now we've learned we can conduct business online. But before that, it was only 9 or 10% anyway. You know, it's been extremely low for a long time. And the biggest proportion, as you can see, is from leisure travel, and those are the trips that we can choose. We choose where we go on holiday. We can choose how we get there and where we go. And it doesn't include visits to family and friends, which is 26%. So it really is those leisure trips. And if we can change the way we travel for holidays, then we are really getting somewhere. Oh, yeah, sorry.
International travel, so what about within the UK?
So this doesn't include domestic flights. This is international flights from the UK, and this is the reason for them. It might well do, because a lot of travel within the UK is for business, but this is international travel specifically. Thanks for the question. Reassuringly, the top 3 destinations that we choose to go to abroad are Spain, France, and Italy, all within easy range of a train or a coach or a ferry from the UK. So these are the places we choose to go. We could choose to get there without flying. And I know that Sandy will be giving us some great information about how to do that in a bit. So, some tips for flight-free travel. You might have heard of seat621.com. This is the absolute go-to for how to find out how to get to almost every country in the world without flying, an absolute guru of flight-free travel. So that's our first recommendation for how to find out this information. Number 2, buy an Interrail pass to keep the cost down. And Interrail really, really helps. So my recent trip to Malaga in the south of Spain, because I didn't just stop in Barcelona, oh no, the next day we were on another train all the way down to Malaga. And in total, we spent £365 on our holiday. That was buying a 5-day Interrail pass in the sale and adding seat reservations for Eurostar, TGV, and then we did have a few different trains within Spain. So the total cost was £365. And that would be the cost from Glasgow as well, because you don't pay for the UK leg as long as you leave the UK on day 1. Okay, so that's an amazing tip to keep that cost down from across the border. And yeah, look out for the sale. Sign up for Interrail alerts and it will tell you when the sale's on. Because if you buy an Interrail pass in the sale, you have 11 months to use it. So you don't even have to have any holiday plans at the time of purchase. Number 3, tap into the coach network. So it's a great way to travel on a budget. And there are some very good long distance coaches, overnight coaches. Sounds like a nightmare, but we get some really good stories of people saying, actually, that wasn't so bad. Of course, stay local. We live in Scotland. Isn't this the most amazing country in the world? There are so many places to go, and you know, the Lake District, Wales, Cornwall, so many wonderful places that we overlook if we're in a habit of flying. And number 5, my advice is not to check the flight price. Mainly because the flight price is never the price that you end up paying. So a recent journey to Lyon, I went with some friends and pretty much everyone else flew. And I asked one of them when we had arrived, oh, why did you fly? Oh, I couldn't really afford to take the train. So we sat down and we worked out how much we'd both paid to get there. And I said, how much was your flight? He said, for £55 or whatever it was. And I said, but how much was your journey? And he had spent over £100 to get to Lyon, and I'd spent 85. And it's so difficult to convince people of that though, because they see the headline price of the flight and you kind of forget that you have to add all the extras and you sort of just deal with that. But yeah, side by side, once you're looking at the full journey cost, it really does compare much more favorably than you might think. But also, you're not comparing like for like. So definitely use Interrail to keep the cost down. But again, just to illustrate, our £365 that we spent on getting to Malaga is definitely higher than if you just fly to Malaga, right? But what we got was so different. It's not a comparable thing because we also went to Barcelona, Madrid, and everywhere else on the way. We had an extremely relaxing and very enjoyable journey, but it's very easy to hold those things side by side and compare. But I would always advise not to do that because it's a different thing that you're doing.
Yes.
It's not so good. I don't know if it's still used more actually, but
When I lived in Folkestone, which is right near the Eurotunnel in southern England, I was on, I still am, on the special offers email list for Eurostar. So whenever there was a special offer, then I'd go and see my friend in Paris or something.
Yeah.
I'd just get a train. So I don't know if it's helpful for people to get on that and then incorporate that. It's still very complicated to do it, but like to join up with all your other tickets.
That's a good tip as well. Yeah, so any of those sites, if there is a kind of email alert system, because you can get £39 Eurostar fares if you're willing to be flexible about when you travel. There's also Eurostar Snap, which is you're kind of at the mercy of the last minute tickets, so you have to be available to travel, which might not be quite so practical for living up here.
From Scotland, it's
No, exactly, yeah. But the cheap fares do exist, so yeah, thank you.
They come up quite often.
Yeah.
Every couple of months.
Thank you. Okay, so just to kind of finish off, I've been talking a lot about our individual choices. And is it really down to us as individuals to make these choices? What we actually need is governments and industry to be making those changes, right? Trying to decide whether it's individual change or system change that we need is actually not the right question, because of course it's both. Of course, individual change is important. System change is essential, but they are linked. They are the same. They're different sides of the same coin. We as individuals are part of the system. If we change en masse, if we are able to create that social change, then industry, governments, the system responds. It's like veganism. So 15 years ago, if you were vegan, you'd be given a salad wherever you went. Now you're given a menu. And that's not because everyone's vegan, it's because it's a thing now. And lots of individuals making that decision and making that choice about their diet means that industry, i.e. the food industry, has given something, a product that's now that we're able to, have a choice, and there's 2 plant burgers in McDonald's, for goodness sake. That is how things change. And that's a result of lots of individuals making that choice. And of course, we need that top-down change. Of course we do. And there are so many ways that will come about. And one of those ways is that we can make those changes ourselves and kind of force that change by showing what we want with our actions. So yeah, we ask people to sign up to a flight-free year. So if you are inspired to do so, then the leaflets are on your chairs, our website's on there. You can have a look at anything more and take postcards and everything. But thank you very much for listening, and I will now hand over to Adam. Thank you so much.
So, my name is Adam Bastock. To prove that I have been on a train, there's a picture of me getting the sleeper train last week. So I run a company called Small 99. We do a lot of action engagement around small businesses. What I want to talk about in the next sort of 10-15 minutes really is our journey of that. So I'll start quite big, where I'll be talking about all the things that we've done to try and engage small businesses on net zero carbon reduction. A lot of the content that's been presented so far is the sort of stuff I tend to do. So a lot around big climate science, all the way through to how you decarbonize the travel policy for a medium-sized organization. And then I'll come down into some of the more interesting stuff around what we're seeing that is working with community action. And some of that is wine-based, I won't lie. The reason why I wanted to start Small 99, I started it about 3-4 years ago, was around this idea that 99% of the economy are small businesses. It's organisations like the building we're in now who make up the sort of backbone of the economy. There's around 5.5 million companies in the UK that do employ less than 49 employees, and those are the people we need to decarbonise rapidly if we are to meet the net zero challenge. This was our sort of mission statement, was that we enable small businesses to grow a more profitable business through carbon reduction. Very boring, not very inspiring, very technical, and didn't really work. What we have found that we do is that we do now run the biggest sustainability meetup in the UK through pubs. So this is what we've really seen start working actually through action is, I won't lie, a Venn diagram of climate and drinking, which is probably a growth industry, which we're very excited for. It's not just me, we have got a small team, so there's me, Val and Julia. Over the past 2 years, we've trained around 3,000 businesses, perhaps slightly more than that. on that carbon reduction and consulting. So that has been everything from running workshops, it's from doing talks like this, it's doing more technical sort of carbon footprint audits and measuring carbon footprints of, what if you did electrify your fleet, for example. And then we also launched People Planet Pint and People Planet Pastry, which are 2 meetup series, which we use as a way to bring people together and bring them into a space which can feel quite hostile at times and can be quite a difficult sort of a high barrier to entry, I think, is a lot of people think that climate action means that you end up going on protests, where it's like, well, actually, what if you just meet in the pub and have a chat? And what does that do to the piece?
How do you organise it?
So I'll go on to that a bit later. But no, so there's a kind of a fairly complex marketing machine behind it. So we've got we do a lot of training on onboarding for different hosts. We have a network of around 250 hosts across the world. So we give them the training and we centralize it all through our Eventbrite account, and we do marketing and emails through like LinkedIn and through our email list as well to get people to that. We do have posters we put in pubs as well. I'm kicking myself because I should have bought beer mats and I completely forgot. But we'll come on to the People Planet Pint a bit later and some more of the why I think it works and where that is working and the stats around it. In terms of small businesses, this is why we wanted to start as well, is because there are some co-benefits to decarbonisation. So there's, in theory, a lot of benefits around increasing sales. You get to cut costs. If you've got solar panels and LEDs, that's going to be far cheaper than paying someone to put a gas turbine on to turn your lights on. You're going to retain talent. People are concerned about climate change, and therefore there's a great way to try and get and retain that staff. And also, really, what we wanted to try and drive was that sort of bullshit-free action. So rather than being tied up in reporting, it was more about just go out and change something, and that might be quite small, or it might be quite big, such as implementing flight-free policies within your company. In terms of people we work with, this is sort of a smattering. The ones that are most relevant to you guys are probably SCVO, so they're the Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations. We're doing an active project with them on adaptation at the minute, and how do we help kind of Scottish third sector organisations to adapt, as well as Glasgow Chamber of Commerce, where we run the Step Up to Net Zero programme as well with them, and do a lot of work with them very closely. They're doing great stuff locally. South Lanarkshire Council, we also did some work with a few years ago. This is the sort of stuff that we used to try and build. I don't want to spend too long on this, but we have built technical carbon calculators where you can get a carbon footprint. We also launched this back kind of 3 years ago now around carbon reduction tools, where you could log on as a small business and you could get a list of actions that you can take to become to lower your carbon footprint. We also have tried a lot of workshops and games. So we've developed everything from the pub mini game, which is like guess the emissions of common issues, similar to what the first talk was saying around kind of people don't know the emissions, what they look like or what they feel like, and therefore we tried to make that slightly more accessible, or at least bring it into where people were meeting. So is a fish and chips meal higher or lower carbon footprint than a beef burger meal or a vegan meal? We've also then developed that, well, we actually started out with doing the more technical training where we would do 8 hours of net zero training, and then we reduced down to actually those sort of games where we found that working much more effectively. So all of those things are things that we've tried. A lot of those things we're not doing anymore because they don't work. And that's why I wanted to spend the sort of remaining, I'm hoping, 10 minutes of this session on. There you go, 9 minutes 39, perfect. The issue we found is that we really found that there was software fatigue out there, and what we were trying to do was, a lot of the time, is we were giving people more things to do, and that is the last thing in terms of selling that you want to be doing. People buy things, people buy a car because it gets them from A to B more easily. It's a more easy form of transport in theory than them having to walk 10 miles a day. What we were trying to do was actually just say, no, don't buy the car, you want to keep walking. And it's just another thing to do. We're adding to their list of things that they want to try and achieve. And even though those tools were simple and easy to understand, people didn't engage with them because they were just overwhelmed, and it was another thing to look at. And this is ignoring any of that sort of overwhelm from doom scrolling that you might see as well. As I mentioned, that sort of pub mini game and the simplification of this to bits of paper that people can move around, and was very tactile and was very social because people were looking at each other and chatting to each other. This is what worked, and it worked in a slightly annoying way in that we developed this toolkit that was about 70 to 80 different cards, different actions. You've got a booklet on how to read it, on how to run it, sorry. That booklet was like 30 pages long. It was really detailed about how to run these sessions. The one thing that we found out of that massive toolkit that people used all the time was the first 10 cards in it, where people had to guess different things and the emissions, and playing that kind of simplification. The reason why that gamification really worked is because it got people thinking and meeting them where they're at. And I think that's where we found that pub-based action was working, because it wasn't trying to take them out into a classroom, it was meeting them where they were already going in their local community. And so throughout all this time, we were developing those technical tools, the carbon footprint tools, like the 2 software platforms, the workshops, the training, the kind of accreditation. They've had it accredited for a while. All of that stuff is running in parallel to us running these pub meetups, which, as you mentioned, we're just going to the pub and being advertised through posters to a certain extent. And yet that was the main product, that was our most successful product. So that's a picture of one of my favourite pubs, which is in London. It's the Thames Dock, so it's actually on a boat opposite Parliament. It's fantastic and surprisingly cheap by London standards. In terms of the amount of events we run, so we ran the first one in Glasgow during COP26, and we're now approaching our 2000th event, which is pretty good going. And so, yeah, we just saw this real consistent explosion and momentum that was building in the different locations, and people kept wanting to run this. And it's only really this year that we stopped and paused and did a lot of work to redevelop the onboarding process and the systems behind it, so that we can maintain this growth and go even further and faster. So like yesterday, I was having a call where we're just taking on board I think Prague, and then there's somewhere in just outside Paris we're taking on board as well as a couple in the UK. So we're starting to build up that sort of momentum and keep growing. Annoyingly, we have got Hong Kong, but they've not submitted their application yet. This is sort of who comes to the meetups. So it's a really broad mix, and I think it's a really important mix to kind of identify, in that a lot of them are just professionals who work in sustainability, but don't really have anywhere else to go. There's a lot of conferences, but they happen once a year and they're normally really expensive, either in ticket cost or in that you have to get to London and then pay accommodation fees. Whereas we're meeting in local communities, and it's a space where they can find other people to collaborate with, or just have a pint and rant about stuff with, because they don't need to explain the slides that we've seen already today around what climate change is and why carbon emissions are really high and what 3 degrees means. They don't need to explain that to people in the pub, they can just chat to them. We've got ripple makers, who are typically the sort of more active local networkers who are going to a lot of different events anyway, and they want to come along and try and drive things forward, and they've got they're really good for us because they tend to bring a lot more people into the meetup than just them. We've got the local champions, who typically are people who are either shifting out of their existing career and moving into something new, or they might be retiring, who are then trying to really just solve those issues in their community and drive that action. And then we've got the sort of climate curious, who for me, I think this is the target that I want to try and build up as much as possible. And this is sort of my 2026 plan, is how do we get that number to be 90%? Because it's the people who are concerned and curious about climate change, who might not feel like they've got a voice or like there's anywhere else they can go. They don't want to go on a march, as I say, but they probably will go to the pub. And that's always been our target audience, but that's where we need a lot more resource to reach those people through traditional marketing methods. In terms of the scale, this is a little bit out of date, but we've run it in about 15 countries. We have run it in over 140 locations. We do about 80 events a month across the UK and internationally. We've got, as I say, over 200 hosts and about 25,000 community members. We've hosted about 40,000, but not all of those are subscribers, unfortunately. Some people do unsubscribe. No, so I think we've got 3 continents. So we've done some in North America, but not many. We've got a bunch in Australia. We used to have New Zealand, but they've sort of changed tack. Singapore is really regular. Hong Kong's coming online. Had a couple in India, and then a lot in Europe. So like the Netherlands is really good. Not many in France. One in Barcelona, actually. One in Valencia now as well. And a couple in Germany are starting to spring up. So we're just starting on that tipping point of going into Europe a little bit more. In terms of the reason why I wanted to mention this, though, I think, is it's really important to remember that the majority of people do care about climate change. This often gets ignored in a lot of news and headlines, and especially at the minute with a lot of the politicization of it, is that I'm just going to throw some stats at you. I've not done it for a while. I don't tend to do presentations like this, so I thought I'm going to treat myself to some stat throwing. So Nature.com was a big article. I'd really recommend reading this. It's quite an in-depth one, but it's called Globally Representative Evidence on the Actual and Perceived Support for Climate Action. Not the snappiest title, but is very deeply detailed, that identifies that 89% of people do care about climate. Climate Outreach, a separate organisation who are based in Oxford, who do amazing work around climate comms and how to kind of reach people. And they've done a big Britain Talks Climate bit of research. 74% of people in the UK do believe that climate change is important, and that's across the political spectrum. This is not just people who are Guardian readers. This is including kind of Tory voters, Reform voters. It's the entire spectrum. It is everybody here. So we'll come on to more later as to what I think about that. Another thing from climate outreach is that 89% of people are comfortable with rooftop solar. So in terms of people who you might think are objecting to this, most people are okay with it, and it's just about getting the finances in place to actually deploy this. It's not a political objection. There's also the Guardian are backing the 89% project, where between 80 and 89% of the global world sort of want the government to be doing more to address climate change. So go back to your slide, Anna, around kind of systems versus personal. There is a personal responsibility to drive the systems change here by being more political about it and driving that. It's just that a lot of people don't feel like they have that voice. And I think this is also the Action Climate Labs one is a really important one, is that around 70% of people aren't climate activists or climate deniers. They're sort of in the middle. And yet, this is what we're shown to see that climate action looks like a lot of the time, is that it's going on these marches, it's Extinction Rebellion. I mean, part of it is the Green Party. I think they've changed tack in the past month, and I think that's been very positive in England and Wales at least, where that seems to be breaking through and having some momentum more than it was 3 months ago. And yet we're still sort of in this identity that this is what happens if you are someone who cares about climate. And yet, what I'm also seeing is that a lot of the energy engagement from the sustainability industry at large is going on those two extremes. It's going on trying to convince and or argue with the climate deniers, or it's trying to support and amplify the climate activists who don't need any convincing. And therefore you're left with this huge middle ground, this persuadables, this movable middle, who everyone's ignoring. No one's really targeting that 69% of people and going, actually, what about them? How do we mobilize them? And I don't quite understand the full science behind it, but I've heard the Overton window used quite a lot, which I sort of understand, but good nods. We need those people to start shifting it this direction, whereas what we're seeing in the past 6 months is it's starting to shift that direction. I think Zach and what he's doing in the Green Party is really helping with this, bring it this way a bit, but I think we're still failing and need to mobilise that in a much more rapid way, which is where the pub comes in. And this is where we're seeing that climate action looks like. This was taken in Edinburgh three years ago. The guy in the middle there, can't remember his name, but he's still going to, I met him like in August at the People Planet Pint in Edinburgh. He'd hired someone from this event. This guy we did work with back in February with him. He used to work for Zero Waste Scotland, then studying university and has got a new job now. But we did a project with him engaging cafes in the Stirling area on this. That's just the Edinburgh meetup. That's not even the Glasgow one. It's not because we had an official photographer for this, that's why these are pictures. That's ignoring the Glasgow one and the impact that's had, and the other 2,000 events we're nearly running. And so I think just in terms of top tips of what this looks like, okay, 15 seconds, nearly made it. In terms of what we've learned, it's all the cheese chat at the start that ruined my timings. I think what I wanted just to summarise really in terms of what all that means and where we're at on that journey over the past 3 years, and in terms of advice for you guys to take away, is really focusing on how people feel. That's the power of the pub, is it's not necessarily about the formal learnings you're going to get or the impact you're going to take. It's the fact you're going to go to the pub, you're going to meet someone you quite like, you're going to hear from them. That social sort of effect is then going to take form, and over the course of a year you'll start changing your behaviour without realising it. And this is where we found that pints and pastries were really the relief. And it was the relief of we're not asking people to do anything, we're just getting them into a room to chat to each other, rather than going, here's a carbon footprint report and here's your recommended actions off the back of it. And yes, it's technically verified, but ultimately, who gives a shit? And I think don't discount status, and it's really important, and this is my background's in marketing, and I think it often gets overlooked, is that people really want to belong. That is why Reform have come out of nowhere within the past 5 years and become so massive, is that they've offered a place for those people's voices to be heard, and dismissing that is really dangerous, because then that's playing into their hands, and actually people do want somewhere to belong. And providing that umbrella on that banner for people to kind of come under is really vital. But logic isn't going to do that. So just showing facts all the time is not going to work. You do need facts there. It needs to be grounded in some sort of semblance of science. However, it is the emotion that's going to actually drive that action and drive the impact that you want. Price matters more than education, and I think that's the real barrier, is that people are very price sensitive and they're going to vote with their wallets over more than anything else. No amount of training that I do is going to actually convince people to spend more money on the expensive thing unless there's a very clear return on investment. And I think postcode matters more than policy. What I mean by that is that local action really matters first, in the fact that I don't really care what climate stuff is going on in Edinburgh, as an example, or in Stirling, or even to the south of Glasgow. Like those areas, if I don't see it every day, I don't really care about it. And therefore you do need to root action in local communities at a high street level, but at a neighbourhood level where people are walking past it every day, and mobilise them on that point. The wider city is still too big. It needs to be really rooted down to streets. This is also just some top tips from climate outreach. I'll leave this up, I won't read them all out, but I think this is a great one that is just a very, to prove that it is kind of backed in science. Climate Outreach did a big report recently in their toolkit around how to engage people. And so it is that element of local communities, making sure you're targeting ordinary people. You're talking about nature, not climate. Climate change is very alienating. It's really big. Nature, people know what it looks like. It's a tree, it's the grass, it's the field they walk their dog on. And therefore they're going to be mobilised that. I don't know many people who are walking their dogs in a car park, for example, but they will take them down by the river, and therefore, no matter their political persuasion, that's a hook that you can kind of target them on and start convincing them on. And also, yeah, there's a lot of work going on. I think the UK is fairly advanced in this. The decarbonisation of the grid is actually something we should be fairly proud of. I think we do have a lower carbon grid than like Germany, for example. France is a lot lower, but the UK is in sort of top 3 or 4 in terms of European grids. And therefore, there's a lot of positivity there that can be kind of driven forward if you frame it in the right way. And that can start at the pub. We do have a People Planet Pint next week, on next Thursday at Malone's. So if you do want to come along, just Google People Planet Pint Glasgow. It should come up in a little box. And hopefully, I won't see you there because I'm not going to be there. I'm in Liverpool, but there will be people there to chat to. I think that's me. Yes, nice. Over to Sandy.
I'm Sandy. I'm an emergency medicine consultant in NHS Fife, so over on the East Coast. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about my flight-free life. To start off with, to kind of give you a bit of a background as to kind of why I'm here. I have 2 day jobs. My first day job is seeing if you come into accident and emergency, and kind of dealing with all of your accidents and emergencies. And then my second job, which is unfortunately unpaid, is trying to work to make emergency medicine as environmentally sustainable as possible. The carbon footprint of healthcare in a high resource setting like us is about 5 to 7% of the whole country. So we've got our own work that we need to do for that. So I am leading emergency medicine worldwide in that, which is a really weird sensation because I only started in 2019, but no one else was doing it. And if you want to find out more about that, then just come and talk to me at the end. You will all have been or know someone who is a climate change patient, even if you live in the UK. It is affecting us right now, and I see patients kind of every summer and every winter who I would class as a climate change patient. So but the hope that you get from that is that everything we can do to decarbonise society will improve the health of our patients. So that's a little bit about my work background, but why I'm really here. I have been flight-free since 2019. I tried to find my picture of my flight-free pledge from 2019, I think, but I haven't been able to put it in here. And the slides are just going to be a lot of pictures of me and my family on trains, and I'm going to split it into 2, so travelling with the family and travelling for work. And most of the travel for work I do is for that climate change work, not for A&E. I don't go and moonlight in Germany as an A&E doctor. And my German's not good enough, so let's see if can I get the slide to go? So, am I obsessed with trains? Yes. Do you have to be obsessed with trains to enjoy trains? No, I don't think so. If any of you know Linlithgow, that's where I was born and grown up, on the back of my garden backed onto the main line between Edinburgh and Glasgow, so trains have always been my thing. If you've ever been to Bo'ness, where they've got the steam trains there, Thomas Tank Engine turned up every year, and I probably till I was about 8 thought that he may or may not be a real thing, and there's a documentary because I got to meet him every year, so trains have been a big thing. If you've ever travelled on Deutschbahn with kids, you might recognise these. These are Der Kleine ICE trains, so the little ICE trains, and you can collect them if you go into Deutschbahn trains, and my kids have really enjoyed collecting these. In my last work travel, I managed to get some for them, and the gruff German woman said, "Wo ist die Kinder?" And I was like, "Oh, they're in Edinburgh," and she's like, "You have to pay for them then." So, and I was like, "I promise I do have children. I'm not just getting these toys." They're really cool, and they have their own Spotify playlist. It's a bit mad. So that's a little bit of an insight into my life. So I do love trains, but as you've heard from all the speakers before, my real passion is to try and be as low carbon as possible. I am a person who's flown a lot in my life. Yes, I do feel guilty about that. Yes, I do have the privilege that I can afford to do train journeys, but actually they're not too much more expensive than the holidays that we're planning otherwise. I do have the time and the wherewithal to organise those things, so hopefully a little bit of what I can talk about can inspire you guys to go on and do some trips. I realised it was one of the biggest things in my carbon footprint and my family's one. And when I started doing all my climate activism in 2019 after the IPCC report, I realised that flying is probably one of the biggest things I could do and change, and it's probably one of the easiest things I could change because you can still have a fun time travelling around without going on a flight. So this is the first bit, and this is pictures of my family, and you can see in the top right hand, Ailey's just kind of going off the side. That's the earliest we travelled with her. When she was 6 months, I managed to get 6 weeks of shared parental leave, and we went on a big interrailing trip together. So that was a 6-month-old and the almost 3-year-old Ada and Ailey and my wife in the back off on that was the Eurostar. That was really good before the pandemic, when you could get a direct Eurostar from London down to the south of France, so you didn't have to change trains. I've had the benefit of being a Londoner, so my wife is from London. I've managed to move to Edinburgh. I can't get her further out with the M25. She feels at home in Edinburgh. So it is much easier when you live in London to get over into the continent, but we've also had a lot of experience going from Scotland, so we can talk through the intricacies of that. And my favourite picture in this one is here. We went to Lake Como from where we were staying in France for a bit. We got loads of buses and boats around, and this was the first time that both children had fallen asleep in the daytime in about 6 months, and we could have a glass of wine each. We ran to this cafe as soon as the one fell asleep in the pram, so that we could enjoy ourselves. It is very doable to travel with the family, especially if you go on Interrail. So I looked up the prices just before I came here. So not on a sale. You should buy them in a sale, definitely. It's 20% off most of the time. 4-day Interrail pass, which is what we normally do for a family holiday, was €238 or something for an adult. Children under 12 are completely free. So and Ada's 9 now, so we've got another 3 years to go and without having to pay for her. So for us, for the family, our return journey is around about 400 and, just under £500. There are the extras that you have to pay for when you're booking your tickets, especially if you're in France, Italy and Spain. If you go to Germany, Benelux, up to the Scandinavian countries, the individual ticket reservations are a lot cheaper. So it does increase a bit. And you're never going to compete with the package holiday to Turkey for a family of 4, which will just fly you there because there's subsidies for aviation fuel from the government. There's loads of different reasons why you can't compete with it. But like for like holiday, you can compete for it. When I looked into this and flying to the south of France from Edinburgh for a summer on EasyJet with all your baggage and stuff like that, and all the things that Anna was talking about, this came out about £200-300 cheaper for the travel. And that's even from Scotland. The biggest saving that you get from Scotland is and with Interrail ones, as Anna was saying, was the price of the trains in Scotland. They're free, so if you go on LNER, you don't have to pay anything for a reservation, so that's just included. And we'll get onto the sleeper trains there, but there is one thing: if you do sleeper trains in France, and you have a family, and you want to have a cabin of 4 of you together without 2 randoms in their cabin, which most of the time we do, mostly because we don't want our feral children to really annoy people, is that you should probably get a first class Interrail pass, because then you can book the separate intercity de nuit France cabins. That's a long story, but we can get into that. That's a little bit more expensive, and it gives these passenger princesses of my daughters an unrealistic expectation that they'll go first class all the time. So when we go on our big holidays, we go first class in LNER. When we go down to visit Lizzie's family, they're like, "Oh, is it not first class day?" And we're like, "No, it's not a first class day. You're just on the normal ones." But you can see here the trips that we've done with them that's often to the south of France because it's a nice place to go to. Another privilege that I have is we have a place to stay in there. Lizzie's parents have a flat, so we can go and stay there. And we have done lots of different things. We have stayed overnight in Paris and found a cheap hotel to do that. Most of the time, the way that we do it from Scotland is breakfast in Edinburgh, lunch in London at St Pancras. We were really lucky to be married in the St Pancras Hotel, so it's always nice for us to go back there. And then tea just beside Gare d'Austerlitz, which is where the sleeper train goes from, and the girls know that really well. Last time we were even able to have a wee walk around the Botanic Gardens before we got on the train. And so you leave Edinburgh at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then you get into the south of France around about 8 o'clock the following morning. And the grandparents often pick the kids up, and Lizzie and I walk to their place and go for a dip in the sea. So that's all really nice, and again, very privileged because we've got that place to stay. I've talked about the Interrail pass, and then traveling with kids, the other things you have to think about are snacks. Deutsche Bahn are amazing. They've got loads of food on there for quite a reasonable price. So if you're caught out and you're in Germany, you're fine. The food selection on some of the other trains are not the best. You can see there's oat cakes in the hands of the kids there. We normally just chop up loads of different veggies, bring them in the bag. There's lots of, when you're not flying, you don't have to be limited by how much fluid or things you bring. So we have traveled with bags full of cheese, chopped up vegetables, smoothies, lots of stuff that we made at home, lots of stuff that we brought on the way just to eke out things to keep them interested. There's obviously some screen time. I'll show you a picture there. And if any of you've got kids and know Octonauts, this is Captain Barnacles. He's traveled a lot with us. So having something for your kids at age specific to be entertained with is really good. One of the best things that Ailey thought when she was a toddler was just walking up and down Eurostar. It's about kind of almost a kilometre long, so you get your steps in, and it's nice and smooth, and loads of people mostly like to see a little person waving hi, so much easier than whenever we've flown with them. And then, so that's in the early years. Then there was a big break in the middle between this, and that's when COVID happened, so we weren't travelling as far away as much. This is when they're looking a bit older, so a few things that have changed when they're older. You can see that we've got into a sleeper train. They can both walk now, and we've only just started to get, not another train journey, or not a really long train journey with them. And we really pushed them this year. This year we went from the south of France to Interlaken in Switzerland, and that was about 13 hours in total journeying, and they were a bit fed up by the time we got to here, but then they looked out and saw this lake and these mountains, and they changed their tune. Going back to what Anna said about the difference between flying and on the train is they are just really interested in what's going on outside. You wouldn't think it of, or you wouldn't hear it from them if you asked them how the train journey was. They'd be like, oh, it was boring, it was long. But when you're in the time with them, they'll be looking out the window, they'll be seeing things, they'll be asking you what this is. They'll be able to walk to the cafe bar and speak to people in different language. We often get chatting to other people who've got kids, or they ask us where they're from, and you get that experience of the other countries, which you might not doing when you're just flying over it. The thing that I love the best about it is that real connection that you feel with stepping out your door, wherever you live in Scotland, and you've never left the ground, and then you step off the train in the last bit and you're in the south of France. It just feels completely magical. Very different to flying. It's hard to experience. I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here because I know a lot of you have experience of the train as well. It's just a lovely feeling, and it's great for them to experience that. And so far, they haven't felt, or expressed to us anyway, that they've missed out from flying. They have asked about kind of when they can go to further away places and things like that. And we, with them, much like being mostly vegetarian or vegan at home, we want them to make their own decisions when they grow up. But I feel that I've done one of the best things I can at giving them this grounded childhood where they can choose to fly later on if they want to, but they've still not really missed out on anything compared to their friends who might be flown off to New York for a weekend. Then I thought we could talk about sleeper trains. Who's done sleeper trains on the continent here? Cool. Who's done sleeper trains in the UK? Cool, that's good. So, and I think I can get into the nitty gritty about the Interrail pass. So, as Anna said, if you have an Interrail pass, you have to leave your country of origin on the same day. So from London and the southeast, that's really quite easy because you can get to a lot of places.
Not quite true. There's a little bit of...
Go on.
So you have 2 days, right? Which from Scotland is not much. But if you go to London, then you don't put the Eurostar, because you have the snap ticket or whatever, on your Interrail pass, it doesn't count. So you could go on the first day to London, take the Eurostar the next day, the first Eurostar out is usually the cheapest. And that doesn't count for your out day.
But is that covering the train down to London?
Yes, that's your first day. That's your in and out day. That's what I mean.
Oh, okay, yes. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. That does make sense. So, but that still means you have a night in London.
Yes,
yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah. So,
Which for a family
is quite tricky with a family of four. So, the way that we found the best thing to do from Edinburgh, and personally for my own in travelling, working, is either get the really early train from Edinburgh or Glasgow. It's really difficult to get anywhere really far on the rest of the continent, especially at the weekends, because the trains don't leave early enough. You can also try the Caledonian Sleeper thing, where if you get on it at Carluke, it is that next day. So you're actually... So yeah, so you leaving after midnight, so that counts as your day of travel. So yeah.
I think there's a technicality there that the travel dates are Central European time. So
yes.
if you come on the Caledonian Sleeper in Glasgow, it leaves after 11 PM. So it's actually the next day.
Yeah, so you can do things like that. So that is good, but the Caledonian Sleeper discount isn't as much, so it's still quite expensive. So personally, I wouldn't recommend that Caledonian Sleeper thing for a family travelling to make it cheaper. Trying to get out really early. There are lots of really good options about where you can stay in Paris or Brussels quite cheaply overnight. And in one day from Edinburgh and Glasgow, you can quite easily get to Frankfurt or Cologne, and they've got lots of cheap places to go to, and you can go a lot of other places. And then in the middle here, that's us leaving France, where you get a lovely the intercity de nuit from Nice to Paris, and you get a lovely view of the Mediterranean as you're leaving. That's the 6th berth you can see there. I don't know who've had experience of that one. It's nice. The kids really like it. I was really worried about them being so high up, but they were fine. You can get a cabin of that to 4 people. Again, on the Interrail pass, I think you have to be a first class to be able to get that, and they book up really quite quickly. So we set alarms about 3 months in advance of when we should book the tickets. We didn't this summer, so we ended up with 2 random people in the cabin, but they didn't seem to have too much of a problem. But that definitely, if you want that security and not having to share with other people, that makes the first class bit worth it. And if you're on LNER and you've got that thing, the first class thing there, you get lots of free wine and food, so it makes you feel a bit smug. And then my other tip is packing. So I've managed to pack for the whole family of 4 for 14 days interrailing on this last one. This is where we went to south of France, and then to the Dolomites, and then to Salzburg and back. And the packing cubes are really helpful. Finding somewhere so you can say where you can wash your clothes is really helpful. However, there was a bad problem this year when I did that, and I got sciatica in the end. So you just have to be careful about how much you're carrying around. Backpacks are a really good thing, but lots of people go around with their wheelie cases and stuff through trains, so it's nice and easy. So then for travel, for work, who's travelled without flying for work to the continent?
Sorry?
Has anyone travelled for work? Flight free for continent? Yeah. So there's quite a few barriers that people think of when I talk to this. So about a month ago, I went to speak about climate change and emergency medicine. That was me there in Vienna. And a bunch of my colleagues from Fife were also going there. I didn't manage to get any of them to go on the train with me because it did take a little bit longer. But some of the benefits from that are that I was child-free for about a whole day on the train. There was stable Wi-Fi, and my laptop worked, and I could just sit and do loads of the work that I needed to do. So actually, on that day, I was able to use one of my non-clinical days for work because I was doing non-clinical work on that. So that didn't count as study leave, and it didn't count as a travel day. There are lots of companies out there now which I think are looking at trying to give you extra time off or extra study leave if you want to travel flight free. The way that I've worked this with NHS Fife is to apply for the study leave, be really clear what I'm doing and how many days I'm traveling and why I'm doing it on the train, and they've not had a problem yet. Is that because they haven't really checked it? Who knows? But I'm being as honest as possible. And I've not had a problem yet when you're going to conferences. I'm lucky enough to be speakers, and they cover your fees for travel, and it doesn't specify you have to fly or have to be on the train. They've been able to cover this. And again, I've just bought the Interrail pass. So I have gone from Edinburgh to Vienna, Edinburgh to Berlin, and Edinburgh to Amsterdam, all traveling for international conferences. The next thing I kind of want to talk about is what Anna and everyone's mentioned as well, is when you talk about being flight free and that experience of maybe being that odd one out. And I think the People Planet Pints is a really good thing that we should all go to, because it's good to talk to other like-minded people. At work constantly now, my colleagues kind of come up to me and apologize to me for flying. And I'm not sure if anyone else has had that experience. I can see that I'm making them think about it, and they have that guilt in them. And I have two minds about that, because we all know that we all feel guilty about climate stuff. We all feel guilty about doing something that's high carbon, and guilt leads to no action. So I don't kind of want to spread that. And that's why I kind of just try and talk to them about all the positives of it. So the positives for me, again, when I was traveling from work, is that you get time off to do that work that you can do on the computer whilst you're traveling. And that you just get that experience of seeing other things and meeting other people, and it is doable with work. I think one of the bigger problems I've had is I work with the International Federation of Emergency Medicine, and they cover the whole world. And it is quite interesting being the person there saying, oh, I don't fly, being surrounded by people who fly all around the world to different conferences. It is really important to meet up and meet up in person, but I haven't suffered any problems from being that person who doesn't fly. I've still had all the opportunities that I would have had if I did. I just have to be confident and say, I don't fly. I don't really apologize for it. I just say I can meet you online, or I won't go to that conference in Montreal this year, but I'll meet you next year when it comes back to Europe. And I think it's a lot more accepted than people might think it is. So I think you just need to maybe have a little bit of bravery and go out there, and people should accept it. And that's what my experience has been. I do wish my colleagues would maybe ask me or tell me about their guilt less and be a bit more active, but I'm working on that one. So cool. That's about my experiences. Yeah.